What if Moses entered the Promised Land? Picture it. The great river at dawn, a thin mist hanging over the Jordan, and an old shepherd with fire in his eyes stepping forward. Sandals sink into wet sand. The ark glows in the low light. The people hold their breath. And this time, Moses, not Joshua, lifts the staff. The water shivers, folds back like curtains, and the path opens. How different does everything become when the lawgiver himself crosses over? Before we imagine that alternate sunrise, let's gently retell the story we know. Moses is the shepherd turned liberator. He encounters a bush that burns but isn't consumed. He hears a voice, hesitant at first, then bold, standing before Pharaoh and saying, "Let my people go." Plagues fall like drumbeats. A sea parts and closes. The people walk dry ground into a new identity. At Sinai, thunder and law, covenant and trembling. A golden calf breaks trust, yet Moses intercedes, this sturdy, flawed, protective leader who keeps standing between a holy God and a stubborn people. The wilderness stretches into years. Daily manna, daily mercy. Battles and rebellions. A tabernacle takes shape like a traveling heart, set among 12 tents, and then a painful hinge. In a moment of anger and fatigue, Moses strikes a rock when he'd been told to speak. Water flows, but a warning falls on him. He will see the land, not enter it. Joshua is chosen to succeed him. After Moses blesses the tribes and climbs Nebo for a last long look. Those hills, that valley, the shimmer of promise. He dies with the future just out of reach. Joshua leads the crossing. Jericho's walls tumble after 7 days of circles and silence. Campaigns roll across the hill country. Cities fall, alliances shift, and a rough foothold becomes a home. The tribes settle. The period of judges begins, ups and downs, cycles of failure and rescue, until at last kings rise, first Saul, then David and Solomon. That's the arc most of us know. Now, let's turn the map. What if Moses entered the Promised Land? How might the world of faith, culture, and even geopolitics tilt on its axis? Imagine that moment at Meribah unfolding differently. Fatigue still weighs heavy. The people still complain. But in this timeline, Moses pauses. He breathes. He speaks gently to the uncooperative rock, and water flows anyway. Or perhaps the sentence stands, and yet, near the end, mercy overrules the ban. This is a story exercise, not doctrine. We're learning by imagining. In our scenario, the old leader makes it across. The instant consequence? The torch doesn't pass, at least not yet. Joshua becomes a field commander with sharper focus, the faithful lieutenant who carries out the plan, while Moses remains the conscience at the center. The ark moves because Moses says it's time. The trumpets sound because Moses nods. And the conquest, under his hand, takes on a different rhythm. Not just a series of sieges, but an extended covenant campaign. Picture Jericho under Moses. He isn't a general in shiny armor. He's the prophet with a staff, the mediator who once faced Pharaoh, now facing fortified walls. He turns battles into liturgies. The march isn't only military, it's a living sermon. Each circle around Jericho is an act of obedience, a memory of Sinai repackaged for a new moment. When the walls collapse, he doesn't rush. He reads the law to the stunned silence. He speaks about justice for strangers, about mercy wrapped in holiness. The victory tastes different, less like conquest, more like consecration. Then there's the tricky business of treaties. We know about the Gibeonites and their clever ploy under Joshua. Under Moses, the master negotiator of Pharaoh's court days might smell deception earlier. Or, thinking of the value of a foothold and the mandate to purge idolatry, he might negotiate an open, strict servitude contract with clear lines. You live, you serve, you renounce idol shrines. Moses has a long memory of the calf. He knows how quickly an idol can become a flame. In this version of events, he cuts fewer compromises and writes tighter terms. Law and land distribution also shift. Moses has spent 40 years hammering covenant into a people like a blacksmith shaping steel. As the tribes stake their claims, he's the one walking the lines, placing markers, reciting blessings and curses. In Scripture, Joshua and Eleazar oversee allotments. Here, Moses presides in person. Small resentments over pasture land, water, the border of this valley or that hillside don't get to ferment for months. They hit his tent immediately, and Moses, practical and plain-spoken, is likely to resolve them on the spot. The east of Jordan tribes, who chose their land early, receive a firmer set of obligations to keep them bonded to the west. It doesn't erase tension, but it reduces the simmer that later boils in the Judges era. Now zoom out. If Moses survives the crossing, old but steady, he might have 2 or 3 critical years in the land. What does he spend them on? He centralizes worship sooner. In our canonical timeline, the ark eventually settles at Shiloh, and high places, local hilltop shrines, stick around like stubborn weeds. Under Moses in Canaan, the memory of the calf is a cautionary thunderclap. He shouts down the idea of worship wherever you like. He likely designates a single clear center and repeats himself until everyone's ears ring. Perhaps it's Gilgal at first, then Shechem between Ebal and Gerizim, where the covenant is renewed with stone tablets and whitewashed altars. He might inscribe the law on larger, more permanent stelae, not just tucked in the ark, but standing in the sun where any passerby can run a hand over the letters. Literacy grows by necessity. Elders and youths learn just enough to read the covenant aloud, again and again. This early centralization changes the spiritual weather. High places still tempt, but fewer survive. The Judges era that follows might be less chaotic, shorter dips, longer plateaus. Instead of the whiplash pattern of abandoned cry rescue, Israel functions more like a league of tribes under a written constitution. Think council fires and sealed scrolls, rather than a patchwork of local shrine politics. When a crisis hits, people know where to gather. Not at random hills, but at the place Moses named. There's another domino, the Philistines. In the late Bronze and early Iron Age, sea peoples press the coast. Under Joshua, much of the Philistine problem matures later, spiking in the time of Samson and then Saul. But Moses enters with national attention, a tighter center, and a habit of preempting threats. He's unlikely to let a powerful coastal confederation grow unchecked. He doesn't have to conquer the coast, but he can forge defensive treaties, set buffer zones, and insist on strong garrisons near the Shephelah, the low hills where so many later battles unfold. That early posture, even for a short time, changes the script. The Philistines don't vanish, but they face a more organized core much sooner. The legendary duel in a valley, yes, that one, may not be needed or may happen under different pressures. And what about Jerusalem? In the canonical story, Jerusalem becomes the heart under David, turning a neutral hill into a national magnet. If Moses picks a northern or central sanctuary earlier, Shiloh, Shechem, or another high place under strict covenant, Jerusalem's later rise doesn't stop, but it competes with a pre-established spiritual anchor. When a king finally comes, the politics of moving that anchor to Jerusalem becomes a sensitive, high-stakes decision. The temple might still be built in Jerusalem, but with stronger debates along the way. Or, intriguingly, the place the Lord will choose might be identified by Moses himself. If he points toward a mountain near Salem long before David, that pre-authorization supercharges Jerusalem's destiny. Either way, Moses' voice in the land means the map of sacred places is drawn with bolder lines, earlier. Leadership succession changes tone too. Joshua's heroism doesn't disappear, but it's reframed. He becomes the executor of a legacy, rather than the founder of a new chapter. Moses convenes one last assembly after the first campaigns, stands between Ebal and Gerizim, and speaks a second Deuteronomy inside the land. Final adjustments, sharper warnings, sweeter promises. Then he blesses Joshua not on the edge of promise, but at the heart of it. The symbolism is different. The message to future leaders echoes. Transitions work best, not at the cliff, but in the open square with the community watching. Quick pause. If Moses had chosen a single central place of worship inside the land, where do you think he would have pointed? Shiloh, Shechem, or Jerusalem? Drop your pick and why in the comments. And if you enjoy these respectful big picture what-ifs, consider liking this video and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Now let's push the timeline forward. A steadier early confederation can delay the hunger for a king. In the canonical path, the The demand for monarchy rises from fear and fatigue. Enemies at the gates, corrupt local judges, chaos in the streets. But in our alternate, the Moses Constitution holds a little tighter. Councils convene. Elders cite written law. The sanctuary remains a rally point. You could still reach a tipping point. Humans love the idea of a single strong figure, but it comes later, and with different arguments. Instead of, "Give us a king to fight our battles," it might sound like, "Give us a king to unify our treaties and taxes," a bureaucratic ask more than a battlefield cry. If kingship is delayed, Saul's story shifts or vanishes. The David saga, hiding in caves, flute turning to sword, a shepherd poet uniting a divided house, may play out in a different register or not at all. That doesn't mean creativity, worship, or poetry dry up. The songs still rise, but the national self-image leans more toward law and covenant than royal charisma. The prophetic office, the check and counterweight, feels stronger because it's anchored to Moses' visible precedent. Prophets have an easier time saying, "Back to the charter," because the charter was literally carved into the hills by the first leader who set foot in the land. This, in turn, reshapes later centuries. When empires loom, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the memory of Moses in Canaan gives exiles and returnees a different script. Instead of dreaming first of a king to come, they remember a covenant keeper who could spend a lifetime without a crown and still shape a nation. A prophet like Moses becomes an even brighter motif. Hope concentrates more on a teacher liberator than on a warrior king. That doesn't erase the royal promises many hold dear. It shades the lighting, adjusts the camera angle. Culture follows. With centralized worship earlier, household idols struggle to keep their foothold. Carved figurines, the little gods found by archaeologists in later strata, appear less often. Teaching becomes a community habit sooner. Think village courtyards at dusk with elders tracing letters into sand, children sounding out the law like a song. Festivals unify villages more reliably because the calendar ties to a named center. Pilgrimage routes etch into the landscape decades earlier, carrying stories, songs, and shared identity. Internationally, neighbors see a different Israel. Instead of a loosely coordinated hill, people with a nomad's memory, they encounter a league with a visible constitution and a reputation for both stubbornness and fairness. Trade caravans learn the rules quickly. Moab and Ammon, Edom and Aram, adjust diplomacy around a people whose first leader wrote the script in stone on their own soil. The effect isn't dominance, it's gravity. Israel pulls around itself a sphere of expectation. Treaties will be honored, idols will not be adopted, strangers will be fed within limits, and justice will be loud in the gates. What about the temple? Without a David and Solomon ark as strong, the exact form of a central permanent house might come later or look simpler at first. An enlarged tabernacle complex at the chosen site, fortified, beautiful but humble, with expansion over generations. Or, if Moses signals Jerusalem early, the opposite happens. The temple concept is seeded long before any king, and when a monarch finally sponsors it, the project feels less like a royal triumph and more like the culminating chapter of a people's long dedication. The theological center remains the same. One God, covenant love, justice and mercy intertwined. But the artistic expression could tilt. More emphasis on inscribed law and teaching courts. Less on palace proximity and royal processions. Imagine arcades where Levites teach children, open porches for elders to arbitrate cases, squares patterned for pilgrim gatherings. And then, in the very long arc, you get stories told a little differently. When teachers several centuries later speak about the heart of the law, they point back inside the land to an old prophet who walked the fields with scrolls in hand, not just the leader who gazed from far away. Pilgrims visit not a lone mountain marked by a farewell, but a memorial inside the hills where he taught under fig trees and olive branches. His grave, if marked, would become a magnet, which raises a paradox. The people would need to guard their hearts against turning a hero into a shrine. In our alternate, the insistence against making images and the memory of the calf would need to be taught even louder, because an accessible tomb is a tempting relic. The Moses who entered would still spend his last breath guarding the same lesson. Remember the covenant, not the charisma. Would all of this erase tragedy? No story does. People still stumble. Leaders still air. Storms still roll in from the sea and sand. But the peaks and valleys flatten just enough to let a broader landscape of wisdom emerge. Instead of spikes of panic and hero worship, you get long, steady rows of learning, harvest, justice hearings, pilgrim songs echoing across the hill country, and children who grow up assuming that worship happens together, on purpose, at a place named long before they were born. And here's the quiet twist. Imagining Moses inside the land helps us see why the original story matters as it is. The fact that he didn't enter leaves a scar of humility across leadership. It says even the greatest don't get to do everything. It says succession is a virtue, not a failure. It says a community isn't built on a single person finishing every chapter, but on a people carrying the covenant forward. Our what if underscores the wisdom of endings. So, if Moses entered the promised land, the map changes. Spiritually first, then culturally, then geopolitically. Early centralization, stronger law literacy, a delayed or transformed monarchy, a different angle on hope, fewer idols hiding in kitchen corners. Jericho's dust remembered not just as victory, but as a classroom, and an old leader for a brief, shining stretch, walking fields he dreamed of, setting stones in place with his own hands. We end where we began, at dawn by the Jordan, mist rising, a nation watching. Whether he crosses or not, the heart of the story invites the same question to every generation. How do we carry what's been given to us? And how do we let go when it's time? Our alternate timeline is a respectful exercise, not doctrine. An animated map of possibilities that helps us notice the wisdom already there. And maybe, as we fold this map, we feel a little more grateful for the way real history holds both promise and restraint, both longing and trust. The river moves on. So do we, carrying the song.